we can get started. We got lots of slides to get through. It'll be really exciting. Welcome everybody. This is a localization is you, but let's localize the slide. There we go. Now we got everybody. Of course, apologies to anyone who actually speaks Japanese. The last slide was all from Google Translate. Not an effective way to localize anything, by the way.
What was it supposed to say?
This. It says this. So I have no idea what it actually said. I assume this, or an approximation of what it said. There we go. So who are we? What do we know? Do we know things? Let's find out. So to start off with,
Excuse me, sir. You're gonna have to sit in the audience.
We were close. We almost had to localize you right out of this panel. So I'm joined with two of my very good friends here. One of which is Norm.
Which one?
That one.
So you weren't here for the pre-test, Norm.
What's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
What was the pre-test?
So we're moving along. We're grooving. So that's Norm. He's still moving up.
Hi, my name is Norman. I do a show on YouTube called The Gaming Historian. They're documentaries about video game history.
This is Joey DeSena.
Hello, my name is Joey DeSena. I've done videos on YouTube, including 16-bit gems and the way games work.
And I'm Chris Pranger. I'm a former Nintendo Treehouse localization writer-editor. I have credits in some of the following games. My favorite is Animal Crossing New Leaf, because that was my very first, and that was my very first game. It was very fun. So, to understand localization, you need to know what localization isn't. So, and a preface, by the way, this whole panel is not to say if you get frustrated when something changes in a game or you see something cut or censored. Being frustrated is fine. That's totally fair, because it is frustrating when you see something get changed or if you see a game that you want to see come out in a certain country, but it doesn't. Like, it's frustrating. So this is not a panel to be like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. This is a panel for context, just to provide, like, here's a reason why something may not have come out or might have changed. So, not judgment here, just giving context for things. So, first thing about localization. Localization is not just translation.
Nothing?
What do you mean, Chris?
What I mean is,
Yes.
translation, as we saw from the very first slide from Japanese to English through Google Translate, that is not all localization is. You have to go through a process of transitioning something from one culture to another, and it's not just about the words, it's far more than that. Second, localization is not censorship, sometimes. There is definitely an amount of censorship that has to go into localization, not for all the reasons you may assume, and for some reasons you may not assume. And last, localization is not just Japanese to English. We kind of get in that mindset being in the US and predominantly playing a lot of video games from Japan and seeing a lot of anime, we assume, oh, localization is just Japanese to English, but it's everything. Every single culture translates to another culture, and it's every industry. It's huge. And globalization is what one friend was talking about last night. She said globalization is the term she prefers to use, because we're in a global market, and you gotta look global.
Is localization a truck?
Yep.
Is it a series of tubes?
It's a series of tubes. So my working definition of localization is the process of transplanting something from one culture to another. And as we mentioned on language, language is important, as language is part of culture, but also considered are the culture's shared knowledge, laws, values, and intent of the creators themselves. So for instance, games transition from the US to UK also go through a localization process.
Yeah, because they spell gray differently.
They do.
They have to go to find and replace gray with.
And that's it.
That's all they have to do.
Yeah.
They got to add some U's.
I think it said, I don't know how common it is, but the phrase that has been used in the past is Americans and British are two cultures separated by the same language.
It's true.
Yeah.
Such as, anyone know any words in US English we can say that in UK English are highly offensive?
Fanny.
Yes.
Fanny.
Fanny. Fanny is not the same region of the body in the UK.
Like fanny pack?
That's right.
Fun
Fanny
pouch.
Yes.
Fun pouch.
Bloody.
What is it?
Basically, bloody, as in bloody girl.
What?
Basically, it sort of seems like a mouse word in English, but pretty much the equivalent of the F word in UK.
Exactly. We use it for emphasis here, but it's actually a lot stronger there. Other examples, you can't say the word pants. in the UK, because that's underwear. And spaz, can't say spaz. Highly offensive there.
Spaz?
Yeah, it is basically on par with the word retard in the UK.
Oh.
It's short for spastic, and that's shorthand. So,
Ah.
little known facts, you might not know that. So, what is the purpose of localization? It, of course, is to adhere
Are you looking at
to...
me?
Do you know? Do you know the purpose of localization?
I assume it's to adapt a game for different cultures around the world.
I would like to guess, I think the purpose is Wario.
Purpose is Wario. In fact, wow. And this is...
Oh, money.
Yes.
About money.
So, this is overgeneralized, but the purpose of all games, if you look at especially creator intent, some games are made, like most games made to be fun, not necessarily. Some games are not meant to be fun. Are most games made to be challenging? Not necessarily. Some games are not meant to be challenging, but are games meant to be successful? That's all. That's generally, in most cases, the creator's intent is for a game to be a success. And this is simplified as money, but success is considered, money is a big part of it. For success means that a series can continue, a franchise can continue, a brand can continue. All creators, for the most part, want to see their vision be a success everywhere, because a success means they can continue on and they can keep creating and making. So here is a hypothetical situation to try to give you an idea of what may go into the thought process in localizing something. Maybe why something may not be localized, or just to kind of show raw numbers here. And this is all very hypothetical. So let's say we have a 100-hour, fully voiced, card-based anime RPG, a very niche market.
Yu-Gi-Oh?
It could be anything. It's hypothetical.
Okay.
You got to believe in the heart of the cards.
Yeah.
So let's say hypothetically, and again, all just random numbers to point out for easy math. Let's say 4 hours in a studio to record for this fully voiced game is going to be about $4,000, and that's being very generous. 4 hours in the studio is going to give you about 2 hours of usable takes. So therefore, you need to record about 200 total hours divided by 4, so you're going to have about 50 studio sessions. 50 studio sessions times 4,000 is $200,000. Add in some buffer of about another fourth of your budget there, say for reshoots, retakes, changes in the game, or what have you. And then let's say you're going to sell the game for $25, you're going for a budget title. So to just pay for this hypothetical, you would need to sell 10,000 copies of your game. And so that's, again, all hypothetical, but that's kind of one of, like a small bit of what goes into localization. This, of course, would not be considering what it takes to translate the game, what it takes to market the game, what it takes to go through testing, or if there's any design changes that need to be made. All of this is just purely for the 100-hour voice game. So when you have these decisions, sometimes a game, they'll decide we can't make this work in this market. Other times you'll see, actually more often I think, when they see how much it would cost for just like a voice thing, some concessions are made, such as, hey, why don't we just keep it in the original Japanese, like voice-wise, and just have subtitles? And a lot of the fans, like, hey, fans of the 100-hour, fully voiced, card-based anime RPG are probably going to want to hear the Japanese voices anyway.
Yeah.
So there's always, there's more and more options these days. So we'll do some classic examples of localization. Who remembers this one?
I remember when it was super mean.
It was a super mean. This is one of the best memes. All your base belong to us. This is just pretty much straight translation. Someone set us up the bomb. How are you, gentlemen? All your base belong to us. You have no chance to survive. Make your time.
I have a question.
Yes.
As a localizer, how would you have changed that phrase?
All your bases belong to us?
Yeah.
We've taken all of your bases.
You showed me. That
There
was
you go.
Well, that's an example of like why you can't directly translate Japanese
Exactly.
words.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to rephrase it for a different audience.
Especially-
Because all your base art belong to us, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, especially because Japanese and English are wildly different languages.
Yeah, Japanese is a much more complex language.
Anyone here speak Japanese? There we go. You know it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's like a whole different language. Another classic. Classic You Spoony Bard from Final Fantasy 2/4.
See, that's a good mistake.
And it is. This, I say, is an example of endearing change. So this was localized by our buddy,
Tim Woolsey.
the Woolsey. Thank you. I keep thinking Tim, but it's
I don't think Woolsey did this one.
You did do it?
They hired him after this game because they were like, yo, this translation was terrible.
Yeah.
Let's bring in somebody.
See, this is why we need the gaming historian here.
Good point. So was there actually a localizer?
I don't think there was a full-time localizer in North America. They just had employees in Square in Japan translated.
That's why I think, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it more, I believe that's why it was an issue and why you had things like, yes.
So what happened specifically is, yes, the game was translated by a few folks in Japan. I forget if it was like actual employees of Square or just some contractors that they brought on. And then the team at the newly formed Squaresoft America got their hands on the script, realized it was kind of a disaster, and I believe the director of marketing and one of the other C-levels tried themselves to massage the script and make it a bit more readable, and one of the things that ultimately popped out of that was
Spoony Bird. Because someone looked up a synonym probably for silly, I believe, or some such word, and it was like spoony. Yeah, that works.
And
This is good.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Donkey Kong is donkey is a synonym for stubborn. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll put that in there.
And this is a great example of localization that now that this has become so beloved by fans, like every single translation that you've seen of Final Fantasy IV, going forward on the GBA, on the PlayStation, on like the 3D or the DS remaster, all of them have kept this specific line because people love it. Another example of localization, this was an example of legal precedent being made. Does anyone know why they had to shift all the names around?
Hey,
Yes.
I just talked about
Oh,
this.
did you just talk
Because
about
if you
that?
have a black boxer named something Bison, or Mike
So
Tyson.
M. Bison, his full name is Mike Bison, which may be familiar with some people who know Evander Holyfield. So it was obviously supposed to be Mike Tyson. So they realized, well, in the U.S. there's going to be possible legal issues. So they basically just moved everyone's name one in the losses. And now in the U.S. we have completely different names as opposed to in the Japanese version where they have the original.
I gotta say though, I like the changes.
Yeah.
Because like Bison sounds kind of,
Strong.
yeah.
I mean, Vega sounds strong too, but now we know Vega has claws, so.
So does it canonically in America is the biggest bad guy in Street Fighter 2 actually named Mike Bison?
I actually don't know. Do you know his first name in America?
Yeah, I read it in a Nintendo Power article. It is Mike Bison.
Perfect.
That's
Nintendo Power.
mildly
never
disappointing.
lies. This one is an example of different TV standards. This is one of my absolute favorite localization moments in Dragon Ball Z, Home for Infinite Losers. Because here in the uncut, Goku falls into hell with Oni. But
you fall down, you have to wear it.
Here I
I'm
am.
sure this is hell.
And one of the most elegant solutions, they just did a minor tweak and it became the HFIL, or the Home for Infinite Losers. And they were able to talk about this on a kid show. They're like, no, you didn't fall to hell, you went to the Home for Infinite Losers.
I like it.
And final, the example of the Chevy Nova, or the No-Go. And this is actually a myth. This did not really happen. So if any of your parents or grandparents are like, oh, remember the Chevy No-Go? It's like, no, I don't, because Nova is different than Nova. So
Yeah.
But-
Because Nova in Spanish means
no-go.
no-go.
But this is an example of if you're trying to do something that's a straight translation and you're not considering the new market, you could accidentally release a product that in the other market is offensive or doesn't make any sense to them whatsoever and gives the wrong impression of what this product will be. All right, so Norm, this is on to you.
Oh yeah. Okay. So localization-wise, with early games such as on the Atari, Television, ColecoVision, a lot of those games they didn't really need to be localized because they were very basic. Just you just choose if you want the game to go to another region or not.
Not a
But
lot
when
of
you,
localization in Super Mario Brothers. Not a lot of localization in Super Mario.
yeah, that was pretty direct.
The original Japanese version was English.
Yeah, and a lot of those
Yeah,
were.
especially then.
Yeah, because they did have the idea that, yeah, this will come to America. But when you get later into the NES era, you start to see games with a lot of text now, like those long RPGs. or some games are very difficult and the North American market is kind of slowly getting reintroduced to video games, so maybe we don't want super difficult or obscure games. So in the late 80s and early 90s, Nintendo adopted their own internal content guidelines for how they want to bring games from Japan over to North America, and they wanted to ensure they had a family-friendly image. So from around 1985 to 1991, the guy that led this group was Howard Phillips. He was kind of the main guy to select games that would come to North America. He chose the launch titles for the NES. Some of them I don't know why he chose, but one of the best examples of localization is Super Mario Bros. 2, which I'm not familiar with. Joey, do you know anything about Mario 2?
I saw a video on it somewhere on the internet, but the guy didn't seem to know what he was talking about. So then I watched your video.
Got him. So in Japan, they made Super Mario Bros. 2 for the Famicom Disk System, and it is basically the first Super Mario Bros. With new levels, and it's much, much, much more difficult. So when that was shipped to Nintendo of America and Howard Phillips played it, he felt the game was too punishing. It was too difficult for new players who maybe really loved Super Mario Brothers or wanted to try Super Mario Brothers. So Nintendo of America actually rejected Super Mario Brothers 2 and said it's too hard. And it's not because, our players are way worse. It's just because they have a very delicate situation here. We're relaunching video games, basically. And so they took another game, you guys all know this story, I'm sure, but Doki Doki Panic, which was a much easier game. It was created for this festival in Japan, and they just put the Mario characters in it, made a few tweaks, and it became Super Mario Bros. 2 in North America. That's like one of the most well-known examples of early localization. Next slide, please.
Next slide, all right.
Okay, so Nintendo, here are Nintendo's internal rules. They had 10 of them. It's kind of like the 10 Commandments of Nintendo localization. This was from a handbook in the 90s they handed out to parents for like getting to know video games. And like Nintendo had a chapter and it's like, here's our internal guidelines. So rule number 1, Nintendo will not approve games which include sexually suggestive or explicit content including rape and or nudity. Obviously some things slip through the cracks. No pun intended, with this man, River City Ransom, showering off there with his little booty.
That's some good definition in that booty, though.
Please stop commenting on the pixel art, please. So this definitely, some things slipped through the cracks, but yeah, they definitely hid a lot of nudity in games. I think there's like a statue in Castlevania 4. Where it's a woman fully nude, but in the US version they, removed all of it, or they added clothes to her or something. Rule number 2, Nintendo will not approve games which contain language or depictions which specifically denigrates members of either sex. I'm not sure if I know of any examples of that.
Of that getting by the censors, or of that?
Or even things changing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely games that did not come over to North America because of that. But there's actually a scene in Golgo 13 where you make love to a woman in this like hotel room or something, and they just completely removed it from the US version. But you see like silhouettes in the window, and you can tell they're doing something. But
I feel there were more games with like dancing girls and things like that in Japan that didn't translate that. I'm trying to think exactly of how Dragon Warrior 4 dealt with that, because you play as a dancer in one of the chapters, and they kind of they have like puff instead of other things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and some sprites were just completely changed. Next slide, please. Rule 3, Nintendo will not approve games which depict random, gratuitous, and or excessive violence. As you see to the right, they missed that one. That's from Monster Party. When you start a level, it's filled with blood. And see, it's funny, in the title screen, they removed all the blood, they changed all that to ooze. It was green. And but I guess they just got lazy in some stuff. But
good enough.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat is a great example. Nintendo removed the blood, infamously, from the Super Nintendo version. In the Genesis version, if you put in the code, you can see the blood. So the Genesis version sold way better. Rule 4, Nintendo will not approve games which depict graphic illustration of death. And you see that in like a lot of the, like those top-down shooters, you don't really see them die, they just like disappear. They're like, ugh, and then they disappear.
Oh, yeah.
In Bionic Commando, I think there's a scene where Hitler's head explodes in a Japanese version. I don't think that's in the US version. We'll get to the Nazi symbols later, but next slide.
Hold on, just one correction. I'm pretty sure Hitler's death was infamous for not being censored in the US.
Could be.
Possibly. Rule 5. Nintendo will not approve games which depict domestic violence and or abuse.
By the way, I was going over this presentation previously. You
Yeah.
weren't around, and I thought you were referencing the NFL with that.
No. The next rule. The next rule. Nintendo will not approve games which depict excessive force in a sports game. This is a really weird rule, and I doubt they ever enforced it. I put a screenshot of Tecmo Super Bowl, but excessive force in a sports game.
Well, have you ever played on the Genesis Terry Glanville's Pigskin Foot Brawl?
No.
Oh, you should.
You think it wouldn't pass Nintendo games?
I don't know. It was like medieval knights trying to run a football like through a castle on one side or another, and you're like bashing other people because they're knights and they're like there's pits, and it's a great game if you've never played it. Just saying.
Is that going to be a new video from you?
Maybe.
All right, next slide, please. Rule 7, Nintendo will not reflect ethnic, religious, nationalistic, or sexual stereotypes of language. This includes symbols that relate to any type of racial, religious, nationalistic, or ethnic group, such as crosses, pentagrams, gods, Roman mythological gods are acceptable. Satan, hell, Buddha. So, for example, in DuckTales, that's from the Famicom version, you see crosses on the coffins. In the US version, it says R.I.P. There's no crosses in there.
But interestingly, one of the levels in the original Legend of Zelda is, I don't think it's called a swastika.
Manji.
Thank you, Manji.
Yes. Yeah. What dungeon is that? It's the third one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's religious.
Mm-hmm. Well, in some games, Shigeru Miyamoto made Devil World for the Famicom, and it just did not come here because of obvious reasons. It was a religious maze game.
Bible Adventures.
Those were unlicensed. Remember,
Of course.
Nintendo would not want
They
this.
probably left the Manji in there because all the levels were packed in the same data structure.
Right. That makes
And
sense.
so they
And-
couldn't reshape it without reshaping all of them.
And they probably figured that no one in America would really know or care either. So.
Yeah. Rule 8, Nintendo will not use profanity or obscenity in any form or incorporate language or gestures that could be offensive by prevailing public standards and tastes. Next slide, please. That's just bad language, basically. Here's another infamous one. Nintendo will not approve games which incorporate or encourage the use of illegal drugs, smoking materials, and or alcohol. As you can see, in Japan, this character is named Vodka Drunkinsky, the fighter from Russia.
That's so bad.
But in the United States, in North America, he was changed to Soda Popinski, and he's drinking soda pop. He loves soda. And also, rule number 10, Nintendo will not approve games which include subliminal political messages or avert political statements. There's actually, I think there was a canceled Super Nintendo game, Socks the Cat. It was like the White House cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might have been because of that rule, because they felt like, well, we're doing a game that takes place in the White House. I mean, talking about politics here. And then I think there's a Famicom game. It's like an adventure text game where like you're running for president or something. Is anyone familiar with this
You're
game?
running for the U.S. president. And
It's like a U.S. election simulator.
That sounds thrilling.
If anyone is familiar with this game, please raise your hand. It sounds very familiar. Yes, what is that game called?
The title I forget, but Nintendo Power did like do a little featurette on it at one point.
Yeah, and
Games that we didn't get.
you choose your candidate and you run for president. Famicom only though. Nintendo America didn't want it. Yeah, it would have been great. I think you can play as George Bush.
You can play as every single candidate in the 1988 election.
Yeah. Ooh, Joey's thinking, I want to get my hands on this.
I was thinking, have you ever played this on neither here nor there, but there was a PC game that came out in 2008 and 2012 maybe 2016 as well, called Political Machine. It's a
Mhm.
PC game where you're kind of, it's fun. It's not overly complicated. I'm just trying to figure like how they would get that to work on a Famicom and not be a giant mess.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So obviously, those were their Nintendo's internal guidelines, and it was a big mess when the ESRB was formed because Nintendo said, we have our own internal guidelines, we don't need the ESRB. But the ESRB was formed and Nintendo agreed to follow those guidelines. So those rules, I don't know specifically if they still continue to use them. I think they relaxed those rules a little bit because Nintendo started getting more violent games
By the
in the Super
N64.
Nintendo and 64 era. Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
I mean, 64 had Doom. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why. So I popped in a few examples here of localization from the Super Nintendo era with a little game called Earthbound that no one's ever heard of.
Great indie game.
It is, but I mean, and Earthbound was kind of bad for things like this, especially like lifting a lot of music from Beatles and other pop hits. But that's fine, whatever. But things like corporate branding, it says "cum." But it looks like Coke. It looks like the Coke thing, swoosh. So they changed that. And then you have to localize all these things that both Norm and Chris here have already talked about, but like the cultural differences of, you know,
Pencil.
yeah. Again, I don't read or understand Japanese, but there's some funny little pun about an octopus eraser that I'm sure someone in here understands and is really frustrated that I don't know the story behind it off the top of my head. And they're like, let's make it a pencil, and then it's a pencil eraser. It's funny in America, so that's a change. And then of course problematic undertones. If you have a guy, if you have hooded people running around trying to attack you, that's not something great in America. So let's make him have a sleepy time cap by putting a little ball at the end. That's great. So.
He's just tired.
Yeah. and quick plug, like all of this and more is all covered in Clyde Mandelin's excellent series or website, and also particularly a book on Earthbound called Legends of Localization.
Yeah, he has a Zelda one too. That's very good.
Yes. Zelda. Yeah. And then he has one on bad translations. And yeah, he's a master of what he talks about. So.
Yeah. So for the next couple slides, so these are some examples of what could cause localization. In the first one here, so character space concerns, audience understanding concerns, appropriateness concerns, sensitivity concerns, legal concerns, copyright concerns, CSRB concerns.
Oh yeah.
Lots of concerns. You have to consider all of these and sometimes even more when you're going to localize something. So first example here, this is a screenshot from the Japanese version of Hyrule Warriors, a game I got to work on, which was great. What do you think we need to be localized here?
I can't read anything except EGM for one.
Exactly. So you have to localize all of the text into English, but Japanese as a language in written form is a lot smaller and more condensed. You can convey a lot more ideas in a smaller space. So when you have to get over to English, which is by nature longer language, you're going to have to try to find what is the most accurate way to represent something. And this is one of the big reasons why localization is not just translation. You have to find something that not only conveys the idea, but also fits in the space. And sometimes you get to ask the developers, hey, can you give us more space? But sometimes they can't, because sometimes the game has been out for a while and they don't have access to that developer side. So you have to find ways to fix this. And keep in mind, this also means the same for French, Spanish, and German. So if you know any German localizers, give them a pat on the back, because their job is hard, and they're heroes. They're truly heroes.
I can imagine German would be difficult.
It's very attractive, very tricky.
Thank you of them working on it. Gives me schadenfreude.
So here, what we need to localize, possibly.
Oh, donuts.
Exactly.
I love donuts.
So, lovely example, this was when Pokemon the anime came from Japan to the US, and kids were not ready to learn about other cultures yet, apparently. So traditional rice balls, they decided, oh yum, donuts, my favorite. And that became kind of running gag in the show, is that they don't eat rice balls, they eat donuts.
For a little too long, I thought that that's what donuts in Japan looked like.
Yeah, when I was little, I was like, man, they love powdered sugar donuts over there.
You might recognize this awkward zombie culture schlock comic here.
This is a great comic.
Fantastic, where it's kind of poking fun at Capcom's localization with Ace Attorney and how, like, yes, Los Angeles, truly the greatest city in the United States of America. I, for one, am proud to live in a country with as much rich history and culture as ours. But something about this seems off. Haha, don't be ridiculous, Apollo. Now come, let us enjoy a traditional American meal around the traditional American kotatsu. Eat your hamburgers, Apollo. Right, so again, sometimes it's just trying to, some companies will go overboard, and not as much. Nowadays, there's a lot more embracing of the Japanese culture, especially when it's a very Japanese game. They kind of keep that, and they embrace it. People love it. Did you have a question back there?
Like Persona series.
Yes, Persona is excellent for that. Persona, like, much of the point and what the fans want is as true to the original source as they can get, which is fantastic. So next one, what could possibly cause localization in these images?
I can see his doodle.
No, nothing. There's no wrong problem. This is art.
Really?
Yeah, there's no localization involved in this because these are art. This is educational. So there is no problem with this being in an E-rated game at all because they're art. Although it's kind of weird that technically that Venus de Milo statue is not truly the Venus de Milo statue because it's in the game you could tell the fakes from the real ones because there were slight differences. So it's kind of interesting. So technically that's not art. That's just breasts in an E-rated game.
Whoa.
So if anyone remembers South Park: Stick of Truth, it was a game that came out on all major consoles from the South Park group. And there's a scene, as I mentioned, where it involves anal probing. And in Australia, they basically said, we can't show that scene. So the creators poked fun at that. So the Australian version, this is actually what they got instead in that exact scene where they just tell you what's happening in the game. But this is cultural sensibilities and laws. Sometimes localization will happen because the country in your laws means they can't show that. Like, no, you can't have that at all.
Wolfenstein,
Wolfenstein?
Hitler.
Yes.
They don't like really talk about Hitler in Germany, I understand.
Not as much so.
Yeah, the Nazi symbol is banned.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, my understanding was it wasn't like a legal banning. It was like the German equivalent of the ESRB. Basically, just said like, no, it's the same kind of thing. It's like the same reason we don't have hardcore pornography in American games. You know, it's not that the government says we can't necessarily, but.
well, yeah, and there is, but there is in such as when they brought Contra over and they became Probotector in Europe, it's because of a German law saying you can't depict humans dying.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
So you were a robot.
So in German law, there is explicit banning of hate speech, and the swastika is considered a form of hate speech.
Right.
There you go.
So you can depict it in like history books and educational materials, but not in recreational
I
materials.
feel Wolfenstein is very
So
described.
so in Wolfenstein they usually instead of a Nazi symbol it's like a lightning bolt or something.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, next up, what will cause localization here? So Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball and Jinx from Pokemon were what we would consider blackface in the United States, which in Japanese culture, not the same connotation necessarily. It's just not as big of an issue there. And things are slowly being fixed. I mean, they tried to fix Mr. Popo at one point in a re-release. I believe this was Dragon Ball Kai on Nickelodeon. They tried to make him blue, it didn't work as well. Jinx, however, has been recolored to this kind of light purple, which I think is a great redesign. Pokemon, to their credit, they do really, really great about a lot of localization changes. But this is a consideration. You don't want something highly offensive, and these characters, out of context, in context, they would be considered very offensive. Yes. So here's another example. What will cause localization here? So this is the game corner, the Pokemon slots from the first Pokemon Red and Blue, which in Gen 2 they added the card flip game in many versions of that for Gold and Silver, a lot of which was like in Korea and in the Western releases, gambling, specifically slots machines, was a little too close to gambling, especially in a kids game, which has since, like, those laws and like the sensibilities are changing rapidly. So I know that slots machines have come back in current Pokemon games here and there. Like, it's weird, but that's a consideration. In some countries, you just cannot have even a slot machine.
You can't depict gambling in the game. Now buy your loot boxes and shut up.
So here, can anyone guess what would cause localization of this image?
It's too beautiful.
So this is the Seattle
We're in the wrong
skyline.
city.
So the Space Needle is actually a copyrighted image. And there's right holders to Space Needle. So if you see the Space Needle depicted in movies, TV, video games, what have you, it's generally because either they got the rights to use the Space Needle's likeness or image, or they didn't know, and they are hoping no one else notices. But so landmarks sometimes, they're copyright material, like you can't just use it. So you have to be, as a localization person, you have to be very aware and check kind of everything. Like you see Skyline, what possible things you need to check.
That's like you can't quote Martin Luther King Jr. without paying rights, I believe, to the foundation that his family runs.
I think so.
Yeah, so you actually can't use the "I Have a Dream" speech, I think, on YouTube even, without clearing those rights. That's something you can get flagged for copyright, technically.
Likeness of Einstein, same thing.
So what caused localization here? Anyone guess? You didn't think animal cruelty? No, just whack-a-mole. Whack-a-mole again. Someone owns the rights to whack-a-mole, the name whack-a-mole, and the concept whack-a-mole. And it's basically only in the West. And the guy has sued and has won against the larger companies for using whack-a-mole wholesale. And so you have to be aware of whack-a-mole sometimes. And Japanese developers love whack-a-mole for some reason.
As much as blackface?
No. Next slide. All right, so last example, what would cause localization here? So this one is very this is tricky, and this is me taking an educated guess, because there's a big controversy here where eventually the image was censored in the US version. This is from Fire Emblem Awakening game I didn't work on, so I don't know entirely the reason. I'm guessing, this is a guess. This was a DLC pack that was included, this little summer pack where the two favorite, as voted, females, two favorite males were voted, and they all got these swimsuit outfits and images, and everyone's like, why did you censor in the US version? Well, you considered the ESRB rating here. This is the actual rating. It's T, alcohol reference, fantasy violence, mild violence, mild suggestive themes. What it doesn't mention is partial nudity, brief and or mild depiction of nudity, which I could argue this may have been that. And since it's a DLC, suddenly the DLC could change the ESRB rating, potentially. And you have options there. You could either A, remove the image entirely and just say, no, people don't get this at all in that version, which could have a backlash. B, you could try to get it re-rated with the ESRB, which is going to take time, it's going to be costly, and they could potentially reject it entirely. C, you could just do it and assume that they won't notice, which if they do, there could be fines, and
you get in trouble for that.
You get in trouble with that. ESRB then might be less lenient in the future about things. So you have a lot of options, and my guess is that we went with the last option, which is let's try to cover it up. But
what are you covering that up with? I don't get that picture.
I think it's a towel or a sheet. But it's all a moot point because we still have this image.
Oh, baby.
This is how I would look at everything. Just change all 4 images to Chrome here. And if this costume is not alt Smash Bros. Ultimate, I don't know what to think.
I like it.
So, modern localization. What do you guys think about what we got?
Sucks.
Absolutely not. Modern localization is excellent. It's getting better and better. As we mentioned, Mado from Legends Localization. Great website for resources, and you get insight into a lot of changes that may have been made. 8.4, it's a great company that does localization. They have the 8.4 Play podcast. And AAA companies are taking bigger and bigger risks these days.
We're seeing a lot more niche games, kind of like the Vita had just tons of very obscure Japanese games.
I think every game on the Vita was obscure.
Yeah, good point.
But it's true. A lot of big companies are taking bigger and bigger risks because now that you have the internet, has allowed less cost. You don't have to manufacture a cartridge or a disc, and you don't even necessarily have to market it in the same way. Some of these releases you can self-release, and so you can really test the waters more and more.
I feel I really started to notice that in the early 2000s with games like Cubivore and Katamari Damacy, obviously.
Mr. Mosquito. One of my favorites.
So, the future of localization. So, what will localization look like in increasingly open culture? And I argue the internet changes everything. When everyone can see what everyone else has, that changes the process entirely. Everyone knows what happened in this culture, what happened in that culture, and what version we all got. And so now everyone can see. That's going to change things.
That was big in the early '90s when emulation started popping up, and they're like, oh, I can play all the Japanese games we never got over here. And people were seeing all the differences.
Yeah.
That's when it really took off.
Blending of culture changes everything as well. More and more we become accepting, as well as the acceptance of unique culture changes everything. Like we're blending our cultures globally, where we're seeing more and more overlap and more kind of just, this is now a global market. We're starting to become a global people. And as a result, there's more chances for more things. Localization is still important per culture for laws and sensibilities, as we said, but you're seeing bigger risks taken, and more things are coming out everywhere that's like really testing out, like, hey, will this work? Will this audience be into it? Is this a new potential market? And finally, so we got Q&A.
I got a question.
Yes.
When are we getting Mother 3?
There are 3.
You guys want to know? I don't know. I actually don't know. And it's, of course, like everyone assumes, like, you were there. I'm like, no, never. Like, it's all a mystery. I could say there's a lot of things that could say we could get it, a lot of things that say we couldn't get it, because everything changes day to day. I mean, even like, 5 years ago, we didn't have Undertale. Now we do.
I thought you were going to say Underpants.
Undertale 5 years ago, now I do. Everything changes.
And in the end, that call is made by Nintendo in Japan, correct?
Sometimes it all depends. Kind of like it is a decision that's way beyond anything I would know, or even sometimes even understand, because there's so much. And Mother 3 is a tricky case. And
So Reggie's just spying this thing.
I don't know.
All right, Norm, when do we get Mother 3?
I would not know.
Just
Not the guy to ask.
Just say, I heard someone say a rumor in before Christmas.
The rumor, if
Just
you
say
put in
it.
a certain code in the Wii Virtual Console version of Earthbound, you unlock Mother 3.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, my uncle works at Nintendo.
No, it's become its own thing now with Reggie teasing us over and over and over about Mother 3 and.
Well, Legends of Localization just put out a giant article about just tracking the
The timeline.
time. It's hilarious and a little sad.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And as a side note, Reggie's super nice, by the way. He when I posted on Facebook that like I just had a little girl last year, he liked that status. So, which my current CEO did not.
Does he talk like he does in the videos?
He's
I'm gonna go home
Reggie,
and play
so-
my Nintendo DS.
You gotta learn the Reggie fingers of power. So you got the fingers of power. Give a little, give a lot, take it all back. Give it all, bring it back again. Reggie's finger of power.
I like it.
Play the game.
Are there any real questions? You do it.
Questions? Yes. Question back there.
Okay, let me get the obvious out of the way. Each of you, what is your favorite localization?
My favorite localization would have to be Custom Robo on the GameCube. It is a great kind of forgotten gem. And there's one point where if you there's like so many options for text if you keep looking at this bench, where it's like, look at it once, it's a bench, look at it again, it's a bench, look at it again, still a bench, look at it, wow, that's the most bench it's ever been, look at it again, yep, wait, no, it's just a bench, and there's like, I feel like a couple dozen options for that, and you can just see like all the heart there of the localization writers. I think that was actually Rich Amtower that did that, so that's probably my favorite localization.
I was going to say the Legend of Zelda Wind Waker for the Wii U.
That was trash.
No, never mind.
Actually, it's great. Very good.
That's cheating, but I really do like the localization of Earthbound. I think that's a gem. It's just a lot of to take all of the quirkiness from the Japanese version and really hold on to that after translation in English and with Americanisms is really difficult. And like I showed before, I'm really fascinated that Octopus Eraser makes no sense. Pencil eraser. It erased the pencil. It's a pencil eraser. That's brilliant to me. So I really love that.
I'd have to say Advance Wars on the Game Boy Advance, because that was a series that I don't think they ever thought to bring over to North America, and they took a risk with it, and it was a good localization, and it was it sold very well, and it told Nintendo that, hey, there's a market for this, and that's how we got Fire Emblem. So I think Advance Wars.
How much time do we have?
None.
None. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's fine. Thank you, everybody.